Hello, everyone. It's Justin, one of the hosts of Dive in the Podcast. We'll get started with the show in just a second. First, though, I want to thank you for listening. We're a new podcast and working hard to bring you interesting content each and every week. If you're not already subscribed, please do. And if possible, leave a review or rating. Those ratings and shares on social media help others find the show too. We've been receiving lots of feedback on the show and it seems people are really enjoying it. And that's awesome. It's why we're here and it really helps motivate us. Again, thank you. And if you want to reach out to us, all of our contact info is in the show notes for this show and every episode. All right, let's get on with the show.
And this year, because they've been here so long, because they're stuck here, we've been getting into the Atlantic more, and we've come back, and she, this week she said to me, Simon, I don't know if you quite realize how totally unbelievable your sights are. I don't think you realize how dense and lively and colorful your reefs are compared to it. She said, we go to this island and we have this favorite dive site, and it is a great dive site. But when I put it up against what we just did this morning, you're absolutely privileged to be diving that every day.
This week, we're headed to the Caribbean. We'll speak to a dive shop owner who's a self-described jack of all trades, master of none, on the off-the-beaten-path island of Dominica. We'll meet Simon Walsh of Nature Island Dive. Welcome to Dive in the Podcast, your favorite podcast about all types of diving, scuba, tech, freediving, and more. We cover it all. Every week on Monday, we post new episodes filled with diving news, interesting dive topics, environmentalism, and much, much more. Because our feature interview is longer than usual and we chatted about the importance of the ocean, we didn't want to intrude into that space, so we're skipping the usual Think Blue segment this week. However, if you're itching for more, you can look up the free interactive platform Ocean School at oceanschool.nfb.ca, something that our future guest photojournalist Nick Hawkins worked on, and who will feature in a show in a few weeks. Also, Nick Fisher fills us in on a Nova Scotia favorite dive site. Before that, we'll hear from the Divers Alert Network about where we're at in COVID-19 and diving. We'll have a book recommendation, April will have a safety tip, and we learn who to follow on social media next. Before we get started, though, let's introduce our hosts. First up, April Weichert. How you doing tonight, April?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Fantastic. Thanks for joining in from Ontario today.
Woohoo!
Nick Fisher, how are you?
Doing fantastic tonight, Justin. Thanks.
Excellent. And Nick Winkler, how are you tonight?
Pretty good. Happy the trails and parks are opening up in this part of the country, so that's a nice change.
That is fantastic. We've got Long Lake next to me, and it's so nice to be actually able to walk along the trails of Long Lake now and not worry about getting arrested.
But you weren't doing that before, were you?
No, actually, I just said that to be funny. That's all.
Right on. Today's my last day of quarantine, too, so that's exciting. I get to, see the world tomorrow.
That's awesome. Speaking of being worried about quarantine and COVID-19, recently the Divers Alert Network, more commonly known as DAN, hosted a series on Facebook Live. This week's live stream was about where we're at in the current research in regards to COVID-19 and diving. It was hosted by Director of Research, Dr. Fraka Tillmans. Over the course of 30 minutes, she covered a ton of great information, filling in knowledge gaps, explaining what's being done and where we're going. A couple of interesting takeaways for me was that they want to hear from divers who have recovered from COVID-19 and who are returning to diving or planning on returning to diving soon. If that's you, make sure to email medic@dan.org to share your information with them so they can monitor and study what's actually happening with divers and how it could affect all of us. She also responded to the information we reported on by Dr. Hartig. She had spoken to him recently and wants to remind us that it's a commentary, that it's preliminary. It needs to be investigated, and that was the point of his letter. Dan has a lot of other Facebook live streams that they have already posted and are coming up soon. So as always, Dan is a wealth of information. Take a look at the link in the show notes to find this stream, and then that will link you to all their other amazing content as well.
A couple of weeks ago, I sat down to chat with Simon Walsh. Simon and his wife moved from the UK to Dominica many years ago where they own Nature Island Dive. Simon's a diver with plenty of experience, and he's also a national record holder in freediving for Dominica, but also someone who's truly enmeshed in his community. What really struck me in the past week since I spoke to him is how dire this pandemic will be for small destinations like the Caribbean. a place that's really close to my heart. It's somewhere I grew up, and Dominica's become my de facto freediving home because I compete there at Blue Element every year. So this interview really kind of brings home like the vulnerabilities of places that we think of as paradise destinations and some of the struggles they're facing. One of the things we talk about in the interview is Hurricane Maria that struck Dominica not too long ago and the impact that's had on the island. So Dominica is also the nature island, as you'll hear, and it's also about the importance of reconnecting with nature once this is all over. Simon's also a great storyteller, as you're about to hear, so sit back and let him take you to Dominica, because after this, you'll want to start planning a trip there. You and your wife Wendy run Nature Island Diving in the lovely village of Soufriere near the very south tip of Dominica. But you wear many hats. How would you describe yourself?
Wow, I have no idea. Possibly jack of all trades, master of none, Renaissance man. I don't know. Pick your. Yeah, basically it's involved with tourism, diving, and science.
Nice. We'll get back maybe to the science bit in a little bit. Maybe for the listeners, set the scene for us. Where is Dominica? And if you had to describe it in a nutshell, how would you do that? And why should somebody come visit?
Yeah, Dominica is situated in the Caribbean, which is sort of stating the obvious for anybody living in the Caribbean, but the majority of people in the world have never heard of Dominica. They know the famous islands, and maybe some of the not so famous, but Dominica's at the very bottom of the list as far as people's awareness of it. It's very untypically Caribbean. It's not your sort of throw yourself on the beach and get a sunburn and play bingo by the pool. And it's rainforests, mountains, lakes in the mountains, 365 rivers, sort of a tagline that they use here. So it's a nature lover's paradise situated with the beautiful weather of the Caribbean. So we have outstanding hiking, outstanding diving. And it's really unlike any other Caribbean island that I haven't been to. I know you're very familiar, of course, with Grenada, and I'm not that familiar with it. Maybe that's one of the closest islands to Dominica, but there's not a lot of people here. There's about 70,000 odd people living here. We see less than 70,000 tourists a year. Of course, a lot of variance in that because of Hurricane Maria in 2017. So it's off the beaten track. It's not your night lover, your people who want casinos or nighttime activities. It's much more of a hiking, bird watching, scuba diving, snorkeling, the whale watching capital of the Caribbean. So all these kind of things kind of sets the scene for why Dominica is so unique.
Okay, so it's an adventure destination. Would that be a fair description?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a little bit of emphasis now sort of also going into the luxury. So, you can sort of do some luxury and adventure. It's not the way I think of it. I think of it as more of a down and dirty adventure. Come here and hike all day, or dive all day, and hike in the afternoon, and have a beer in a hot tub up in the mountain, and it's a really unique place. And you've been here enough. The people here are very unique, very open and friendly.
For sure.
And you can really sit and chat to anybody anywhere in this community or pretty much anywhere in the island and meet interesting people. So it's an island that's sort of managed to survive, on agriculture and because it's such a fertile island, and it's got a long history of survival and resilience, which is bearing us well these days.
Yeah, I'm sure. Diving or Dominica, which one came first for you?
Wendy and I were traveling the world looking for places to settle down. We'd been a couple of years all over Southeast Asia and the Pacific and all sorts of places. And we ended up, strangely enough, in Dominican Republic. So we were offered a job there. And we were sort of ho-hum about the Caribbean in general, because we tended to think of it as that, bingo by the pool type of place. Mm-hmm. And although at that time I'd been to Jamaica, I'd been to Aruba, I'd been to Dominican Republic, I'd been to a couple of the islands, but all of them were pretty much falling very much within the typical Caribbean destination. And so when we got to Dominican Republic, we said, well, we're here, let's have a look around the Caribbean and see. And we kept hearing about, Dominica. And so we said, this sounds, and by now, we've been traveling for a couple of years, and we sort of had a checklist of things we were looking for.
Right.
And we came to Dominica, and it just went check, 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 check. And here we are 25 years later.
Nice. So, I mean, it's just one point for the listeners, right? Dominica and is not the Dominican Republic, and people can get that confused.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that want to change the name of Dominica because obviously our big brother, the Dominican Republic, is known by everybody. So I'm sure you've had this happen, but you tell people I'm going to, Dominica, and they say, "Oh yeah, I went to Punta Cana," and you're like, "No, no, 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 it's not there. Certainly not Punta Cana. Even Punta Cana doesn't represent the Dominican Republic." But a lot of times we have people, even when I represent Dominica overseas at various dive shows, people come up to the booth and say, "Oh yeah, my wife and I were there," and I can kind of look at them and say, "Punta Cana," and they say, "Yeah." I say, "Wrong booth. Go down the aisle, you'll find Dominican Republic."
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's partly the challenge and partly what keeps it unique, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, as I said, I worked in Dominican Republic, and there people were, flying from England for £600 for 2 weeks, all your booze, all your hotel, your all your food, everything all inclusive, round trip airfare. Dirt cheap flights, charter flights, people just flying out there, and to be honest, getting drunk all day and then flying back to England with a nice sunburn. And then people here, it takes a lot more effort to get here. So you don't go in the high street in England and see posters for Dominica. So yeah, very, very different product, very different experience, and very different clientele.
So that was going to be my next question. How does one get to Dominica?
Of course, we have no internet. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. We have no airports large enough to handle big planes. People say we don't have an international airport, but our flights fly from Dominica to San Juan, United States. They fly to Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Martin. All of these are different countries. So our airport is international. It's just not big. And the planes are not big coming in. So most people coming from Canada might come down through, as you know, it can be different sort of every time you try and come down here, but you can fly through Barbados, Antigua, Saint Martin, San Juan, any of those places. Anybody coming from Europe from the UK tends to come through Antigua or Barbados. And of course, we have a lot of French people here because we're between the two French islands of Martinique and Guadeloupe. So Europeans fly cheap flights into Paris and then Paris to Martinique or Guadeloupe, and then they take the ferry over. So it's very different clientele because our American clientele is usually very typically American. They have 1 week holiday, they got to get where they're going, they got to do what they're going to do, and they got to get home and get back to work. Whereas the Europeans are coming over, I'll spend a couple of days on the beach in Guadeloupe and have some good French food and some wine and cheese, and then I'll pop over to Dominica, get in some great diving and more of a rustic experience. And then on the way back, maybe I'll fly to Martinique and have a few days there and then fly back to Europe. So for our North American clientele, it's a challenge if you're trying to do Dominica with only 7 days holiday. Right. And that's one of our biggest impediments to growing our North American market. But our European market's been growing quite well and doing quite well.
Nice. Well, hopefully we get more people from North America come visit you for sure. It's not a place to miss. If divers come to Dominica and Soufriere specifically, what's the accommodation like for them?
Well, we have two great options now. So depending where your budget lies, if you're coming here on a budget, we have the Soufriere Guest House, which is they have 5 rooms and 2 dorms. The dorms run for $20-25 US a night, and the rooms are between $50 and $60 US a night. So very reasonable, 5-minute walk from the dive shop through the friendly village of Soufriere. So people actually really enjoy their morning walks down, and by the time you've done that for a couple of days, everyone's saying "Have a nice dive," and people are waving and smiling as you come down to the dive shop. So that's our budget end, and then we have the non-budget end, which is Jungle Bay Villas, which is sitting on the cliffs overlooking us, and they do an incredibly good job, and it is an incredibly beautiful villas. I wouldn't really call it a hotel. I don't want to give the impression that it's sort of a big block hotel. It's a series of villas. You have your own villa. They have about 30, 40 villas open right now. They're still in phase 1 or 2, and there's still some construction going on some more villas. But absolutely incredible view of, you sit in the swimming pool with Infinity Edge and you overlook the entire marine reserve where you've been diving all day. And they also do a customer service-wise, they do a fantastic job. And they're very community-oriented and very adventure-oriented. So when they moved their location over to this side of the island, I was actually really happy because they mesh very well with the philosophy of Nature Island Dive, which is work with the community and try and lift up the community from where you're doing business.
That's lovely to hear, and it's nice that there's a range of options for different clientele as well, and that can only be good for the village. Can you tell me a little bit what divers can expect when they come to dive with you?
Sure. We're situated in the middle of a large bay. On one side of the bay is the village of Soufriere, where we are, and across the bay is the village of Scott's Head, which is the southernmost village in the island of Dominica. And that bay itself is home to quite a few dive sites. And then as you go around Scott's Head, you go out onto the Atlantic side, or actually technically I would call it the windward side. It's a little bit rougher sometimes. It can be a little bit more current sometimes. So you have this diversity of dive sites from incredibly pristine, untouched pinnacles, walls. Sometimes you can get a little bit of current, but the great thing that we have here is if we sort of go out of the bay, then you're going into the slightly more advanced sites. But if you turn right and you head north 5 minutes, you can be on a wall that's 1,500 or 500 meters deep. And you can do that with a Discover Scuba. Somebody who's never been diving in their life, you're just doing that.
Wow.
You're taking them for their first dive ever. The top of the wall is a sort of a 30, sort of 12 meter ledge where you take people down, and you have this wide, large area where you can take the beginner, and then as they get comfortable, you take them to the edge and they can look down this wall, 1,500 feet. So
That's pretty mind-blowing.
yeah, it's mind-blowing, and it's easy. There's no currents there ever. So it's a beginner's site. It's just the sort of the wow of the 1,500-foot wall. So we have the middle of our bay is well over 3,000 feet deep. So we have deep water very, very quickly. If you walk from a beach, you go 2 steps, you're knee deep. You go 2 steps, you're up to your chest. 2 steps more, and you're over your head. So I mean, it gets deep very, very quickly. As you guys know, that's why the free diving's become such a big thing here, because you don't have to go far to get deep water.
Yeah, it's certainly a lovely spot to dive, and it's close to my heart. What would you say is your all-time favorite dive experience in Dominica, or your favorite dive site, or anywhere else in the world for that matter?
Yeah, I think it's always an interesting question. I think if you jump in the water every day and you like do these shark feeding programs, probably you ask that person, what would you like to do on a good dive? He'd probably tell you, I just want to go and look at corals and fish. And he doesn't want to see sharks, right? Because he sees them every day. So
right.
You have somebody who swims with sperm whales, as we do here, and they do that every day. They'll probably also want to see some pretty corals and look at stuff. So, here we don't see sharks. We don't see a lot of big stuff. So, I mean, I'd love to go somewhere and dive with a lot of sharks and some big manta rays and stuff like that. But here, what I love about Dominica is I've been here 25 years. I have logged, I think I stopped logging at 5,500 dives.
Wow.
And that was a long time ago. So I've done way more than that.
Right.
And I'm never bored. There's always something going on. And, people are amazed. I was actually, quick story, but I was diving in South Africa this year. And in September last year, sorry. And I was on the boat, and the owner had said, I went on a quite advanced boat, and the people were kind of surprised to see myself and my son, Andrew, on the boat. And they said, well, normally you have to dive, they have to see you diving before they let you come on this boat.
Right.
And the owner was on the boat, and he said, no. This guy's done like 10,000 dives. He owns a dive shop in the Caribbean. He's been through everything. I had dinner with him last night. Trust me, you don't have to worry about this guy. So they were asking me, a lot of them were South Africans, and they were asking me, what's it like diving in the Caribbean? And we were on an inflatable rib. There was about 12 of us on the thing, and we were going out to a reef called 9 Miles. And along the way, some bottlenose dolphin came up and swam alongside the boat. So the boat captain says, okay, everybody, masks on, fins on, and he did a circle. and dropped us off. And we swam with the bottlenose dolphin for about 10 minutes. And they came and played with us and hung around us. And we had our GoPros. And I mean, it was awesome, right? And we get back on the boat and everybody's high-fiving and screaming. And then, as things calm down, somebody looks at me and goes, I guess this is old hat to you. And I just laughed and said, are you kidding? Swimming with bottlenose dolphin could never be old hat. And by the way, that's the first time ever that I've swam with bottlenose dolphin. So, here you have somebody who's highly experienced diver like myself, but you still have first-time experiences wherever you can go. This last week, Desiree, who you know, and I just the two of us went out lionfish hunting on the Atlantic side. And the visibility wasn't very good, and we were having a pretty good success lionfish hunting. And then I started rattling we have these rattles on our BCDs to attract attention. So I rattled and I tell, for Des, and there was this, well over 2 meter long tarpon, which that's only the second time in 25 years I've ever seen a tarpon here. So anyway, by the time I got her attention, it was gone. And then about 5 minutes later, I swam with about 20 of them a meter away from me. And they just circled around me. And I mean, so that's my favorite experience right now because it's sticking in my head, these monster over 2 meter tarpon. You go to somebody in Florida and they're like, you kidding? We see those off the jetty every day. They just live here. And, so I mean, what I love is that you never know what you're going to see. Here you see a seahorse one day, you see a tiny little shrimp the next day. You can see last year we saw a humpback whale from the boat. You can listen to humpback whales singing while you're diving. But the good thing is in Dominica is that the reef is so healthy. You don't need a lifetime, one-time experience to enjoy the dives. Every single dive is literally just a rich experience. And so, I mean, that's magic. The two divers we have here right now who are stuck here because of our current worldwide situation, they're pretty serious divers. And they talk about other places. I won't mention them. They dive in the Caribbean, and they normally do... I think it's about a 3-month trip in the Caribbean every year, a month in different destinations. And they always do a month in Dominica. And this year, because they've been here so long, because they're stuck here, we've been getting them to the Atlantic more. And we've come back and this week she said to me, Simon, I don't know if you quite realize how totally unbelievable your sights are. I don't think you realize how dense and lively and colorful your reefs are compared to... She said, we go to this island and we have this favorite dive site, and it is a great dive site. But when I put it up against what we just did this morning, you're absolutely privileged to be diving that every day.
That's wonderful to hear, and it speaks again to how unique Dominica is. And your story about South Africa, right, and just your experiences in diving really speak to how... amazing and the oceans are, and how they can never cease to surprise us, which kind of goes back to a question I wanted to ask you, and I kind of set it up in the beginning of the interview when I asked you to describe yourself, because I know you're very much involved in community, you're involved in photography and marine conservation. I just kind of wanted to give people a sense of the fact that you're not just a dive shop owner, you do all these things in the community and in conservation, and maybe if you can tell me about some of that work.
Yeah, no, I mean, the community, I think what I'd love to say people come here and fall in love with the dive shop or the experience or the divers, but you know what a lot of people come here and fall in love with? It's the community that we live in. So people come back here and choose because they know the diving's great. They love the community. And this to me was really, really... a key experience and a key sort of indicator to me of how special, our community is after Hurricane Maria, where the divers who come down here and dive every year were contacting me and saying, I need to send a barrel down. And they weren't just sort of saying, I want to help Dominica. They were like, I want to help Isaac, Weefy, I'm sending you a carton, and I find out what Weefy needs, find out what Isaac needs, find out what what Rakai needs, find out what everybody needs, and people just sent stuff down for their people within the community. And a lot of times it was people, I had to ask them, wait, who are you talking about? Because they were people that were not part of our dive community, but they were in the village and people they'd got to know walking back to their cottage or their rental apartment. So they were people that I didn't even really know they were friendly with, but they'd stayed in touch with those people, and you'd WhatsApp when babies were born and all these kind of things would happen. So
Right.
it's a very special community, and I was very, after Hurricane Maria, as you said, I did. I think it's when it really occurred to me that this is my home, and I've sort of been a nomad most of my life and lived in a lot of different countries. And I've sort of been here for 25 years, and it felt like this. I don't own property anywhere else. I don't have any vested interest in other countries anymore, really. But still, it was really only after Hurricane Maria where I realized this is it for me. This is really my community, my home. The way we treated each other down here, and then as you know, I lost my house in the hurricane and business, and Wendy lost her business, and so we were, I would say, rudderless after the hurricane. And of course, you're just another mouth to feed and another part of the problem if you stay here. So we left, and then I started immediately putting together a GoFundMe to come back to the community and bring food and water and medical supplies and fishing supplies and boat engine parts. And the dive community, and I'm not talking necessarily just about the divers who have come to us, but
Right.
but the manufacturers and the wetsuit manufacturers, Henderson Wetsuits and the light company, the one who make dive lights. All of these companies just were donating to this and saying, I called one guy and I said, look, we've got no lights. He said, what do you need? I said, I don't even know. And he said, when are you leaving back to Dominica? I said, I leave in 3 days. And 2 days later, I got this huge box of lights from this, dive company, just saying, just get down there and get people light. And so we got tremendous support from the dive community and the manufacturing, and that
Wow.
and then when I did come back here, I managed to raise quite a bit of money and go to St. Lucia and charter a dive boat and bring in huge relief funds for Dominica. And I worked with a very good friend of mine, Jake Levinson, is a scientist up in the United States. And we basically fed 5 communities after the hurricane. So yeah, a lot of community work, and it's not something that I would just consider giving back to my community from which I live. It's it was a very special time. And then and then after that, as you know, I kind of got this job for Resilient Dominica, ResDM, and it was a complete blessing for me because it's funded by the Daniel Langlois Foundation, a gentleman from Montreal,
Right.
Canada, fairly famous individual who has Petit Colibri Ridge's development here, and then he's supposed to be opening this year, but I don't know under the current worldwide situation. Anyway, he hired me as the project manager, and we rebuilt the school, and we're building a jetty, and lots of different projects within the community, a tool loan program and school feeding program, and lots. So I got to collect a salary, which at that point was a crucial thing because I took my entire salary and put it back into the dive shop to rebuild the boats and clean up the dive shop and put in new windows and get the dive shop so I could employ people again, which because of my situation that I got a salary, I could put that salary into the dive shop and get people back. And after something like Hurricane Maria, employment's so important. So that was the community work, and then that sort of led into the science of, here we are in the front lines of climate change. And what can we do with coral reef restoration and turtle preservation and all of these things? So again, you can't just make money from an environment and fall in love with the environment without feeling the need to give back to it. So this is sort of my, and I really would say I'm in the very beginning phase of that. I think the science and the giving back on the conservation something is we're just launching now 2.5 years after Maria. We last year we saved a lot of turtles and we did a lot of good work. But I think we're just beginning. We had a conference call with some of the best minds in coral reef restoration a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really excited about that. My entire staff is excited to be part of it, and we really want to see what we can do to help the oceans, because, as you said, they're a remarkable resource. They're a place we can go, and I know we have scuba divers now and free divers now, and those of us lucky enough to get in the ocean, and it's cathartic in these difficult times when you just want to, flush your head out from, coronavirus and politics and all of these things. You get in the water and whoop, it's all gone.
That's the magic of diving. That kind of brings me to one of my last questions, and you touched on a couple of the themes in terms of resilience and, Hurricane Maria, and then, the Caribbean, like the rest of the world, experienced the recession in '08, and now there's this pandemic, right? Just to kind of maybe, I don't know, put a positive spin on it in a sense, if it's possible, and maybe relate it back to everyday divers that might be able to travel in the future. How can divers or visitors support a small operator in a community like you, or a small island destination like Dominica in the Caribbean? What can they do?
Yeah, I think Nick, when you get to the kind of clientele that Dominica attracts, which is your nature lovers. So let's just say you might be a bird lover, you might be a diver, a snorkeler, a hiker, but basically what you love is being out in nature. And so those are a very different kind of people that want more than just a vacation. They want to feel they gave something back. So when they travel, it's nice to know that the money you're putting in and spending, whether it's scuba diving or whatever you're doing, is going into a community. So I think we offer a very unique destination. Nature Island Dive offers a very unique experience in that you are supporting the community, you are supporting science, you are supporting conservation. I think we're just getting started. The times after Maria were unbelievably hard. It was, 240 or 350 km/h winds for 6 hours. That just pretty much ripped Dominica to shreds. There was no trees, there was no leaves, there was no green. The only green things in Dominica was grass, and most of that was covered in debris and boats and pieces of cars, and it was an incredibly destructive experience.
Yeah.
But we came back and we rebuilt, and I think you've seen Dominica.
Certainly have.
I don't know how. What was the first time you came back after Maria?
I think it was just around 9 or 8 months. 9 or 8 months after.
Yeah. So you saw how bad it was after 8 or 9 months. It was bad.
Yeah.
Wasn't as bad as the day after, but it was bad. And you've seen it recently. You've seen it a few months ago. And you know how far we've come and how resilient nature is, and what an incredible story Dominica is, that basically we just pulled our socks up and got on with the business, and with a lot of help from people like Red Cross and Samaritan's Purse and Israel Aid and UNDP and a lot of people who did help us along the way. But I'd say we were back. This season we had a good season. You saw the difference between the freediving competition right after Maria and the one this year.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the positivity, everybody was in a good place. We felt like we were controlling destiny again. And now, so quickly you just have this coronavirus situation come up. So I don't know. I'm hoping that, I think all of us who love nature and are a little bit jaded right now, especially with the U.S. administration and what's happening in the United States, certainly not leading the way in any way in the eyes of conservation. And in fact, going in the opposite direction. And we see the same things happening in Brazil and many other countries around the world where we sort of despair a little bit. But maybe we can come out of this coronavirus and realize the value of nature, and the fact that the most important thing is not GDP and economic growth, and that we need to value people better and value Mother Nature. We need to value each other a little bit more. So I think we can come out of this stronger. And I think Dominica in general is a place that people need to come to sort of reconnect to the way things used to be and the way sort of people live. Even here in Dominica after Maria, you saw people reconnect with nature, and on our flag it says after God, it's the land,
Right.
because the land has always been important in the history of Dominica. And after Maria, it was the land that fed us, And in coronavirus, we had a staff meeting in the dive shop, and we have zero income from this month until December, as far as we know. We don't have a single booking. Everything was canceled. All the deposits handed back. So we don't know what's going to happen. So I've said, look, I'm not Dominican born, but you know what? It's time to go back to the land. So everybody's planting, everybody's putting bananas in, everybody's putting in plantain and dasheen, and and so we're reconnecting with Mother Nature. And I think people that come to Dominica in their various ways, whether it's free diving, scuba diving, or hiking, will find a place that you can reconnect.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I wish you guys the best of luck. I mean, just from my experience, knowing people in Grenada, I know that, even if things stabilize, in the near term, it's going to be an incredibly tough challenge to get through the next 2 years.
I think the difference this time, Nick, is after Maria, the world came to help us, and then this one, the world needs help. There's no one that's not going. There's no one that's not going through this.
Yeah.
So my business is in trouble. My employees are going to be challenged. But then I look at it and say, well, you know what? I'm not locked up in an apartment somewhere, self-isolating, because I'd be going crazy doing that. So
yeah, I kind of envy you right now on that front. We're all experiencing this from a very, very different perspective, each and every one of us.
It is amazing.
Yeah. I just kind of want to finish off by letting the listeners know that you also have a Bottom Time Cafe, which you serve wonderful coffee, and I hopefully one day a world famous lionfish sandwich. And just to let the listeners know that lionfish in the Caribbean is invasive, so removing it from the reef is actually a necessary conservation tool, and also an activity that divers can engage in. Last question, where can people find you online if they want to spend their time in self-isolation searching up Dominica?
Yep, you can look for us of course, on the internet on natureislanddive.com. So that's 2 Ds, natureislanddive.com. And then we're on Facebook under Nature Island Dive, and we're also on Instagram under Nature Island Divers. So we try to put stuff out there. Marketing is a little bit of a tricky thing to be doing right now, because I do realize that people are stuck in apartments, so I don't sort of want to say, hey, look what I did today, People are going to hate you for that, right?
No, I think they'll appreciate that somebody at least is getting out in the water from time to time.
Yeah. And so you can definitely find out what we're doing and keep abreast of all our activities, and hopefully have time to, in a not too distant future, book a trip down to Nature Island Dive in Dominica.
Yeah, I certainly look forward to hopefully coming down in November, if that is possible, to come to the competition and hang out in the dive shop and see you and everybody else. I'm really looking forward to that. Right now, it's probably the only travel plan I have, with everything else that got canceled.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Simon. I really appreciate it.
I know you're a Caribbean boy at heart there, Nick. So I know how much you're dying to get back down here, and I'm with you. I can't tell you how much I want to see you in November. So that will be something that we can all look forward to.
Boy, Nick, you were right. I actually, editing that and re-listening to that now, I really want to go to Dominica. It sounds like an incredible place.
It's pretty awesome. I've been there 3 times in the last 2 years, mostly for freediving. I've done a couple of scuba dives with Simon and his team there. It's a great little community there. You kind of fit right in. You're at home pretty much as soon as you get there, and it's idyllic. It's local, and the island has so much to offer topside, from waterfalls that have hot springs attached to them, that sort of thing. It's pretty cool.
Maybe I'll cancel my trip to my sister's wedding and go to Dominica instead.
It sounds like a good trade.
I'll join you.
Good planning
We
there.
can all go. Yeah.
Perfect.
Podcast from Dominica.
I'll need someone to babysit the kids.
Bring them.
Yeah. Hey, thanks again, Nick, for doing that interview. That was really great. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to take a second to thank our sponsor, Torpedo Rays Scuba. Torpedo Rays is a local dive shop in Nova Scotia. If you're not in Nova Scotia, that's okay. They've got a wonderful website, torpedorays.com, TORPEDORAYS.com. All of the scuba gear you could ever need is there. If you can't find it, give Jason a call, 902-481-0444, and he'll be happy to help you out. And these challenging times, it's always great to shop local. Don't go to a huge big box. Help support your local dive shop. Buy something you've had your eye on. Excellent time to make a good deal. Buy a gift certificate to use later. Whatever the case may be, Torpedo Rays and torpedorays.com will be there for you. Once again, their number is 902-481-0444 or torpedorays.com. Nick Fisher, what do you have for us this week on your segment?
Well, this week I will be reviewing another classic Nova Scotia dive site, Birchie Head. Birchie is a fantastic dive site if you have a little bit of experience under your belts. Due to its depth and difficult entry, I'm a huge fan of deep water dives, and Birchie is the perfect local dive site for that. It is really easy to find 130 feet, but also hosts a wide variety of sea life on the shallower area of its shelf. Aside from being a nice deep site, one of the most prominent features is its entry. Unlike Paddy's Head, which we've covered in previous podcasts, which is another classic Nova Scotia site, Birchie has pretty much the opposite of an easy entry. To get down to the beach, which really isn't much of a beach, it's actually just a bunch of rocks, you have to rappel down a small rock face. I mean, I use the term rappel pretty loosely, as you're really just using a rope to help yourself, down a rock. But it does require divers to do a little bit of parkour to get down.
Parkour.
Parkour! Michael, parkour! Parkour! Extreme!
But once you are down, it does make for a really enjoyable dive. And for the deep water and rock climbing / scuba diving enthusiasts, it's really a great site. Any of you guys have any good Birchie stories? Do you feel like the dive site is worth the work required to get down into the water?
Oh, yeah.
Birchie is, first of all, you blink, you miss it. You drive right by. If you don't know where you're going, you'll drive right by it because there's no parking lot. You park literally on the side of the road and don't leave your door open or another car will hit it. Curtis. You climb over the guardrail, down the rock, like you said. There's that giant rope there hanging over the rocks, and unless you go down the secret path, but it's still crazy. Gear up down to the water if you didn't carry your gear down. Go through the back breaking or ankle breaking pebbles, the size of golf balls that are shifting under your feet as the waves are breaking at your butt. Once you get to about knee depth, you just flop into the water and go out, and you have a fantastic dive. It is the most insane entry for a scuba site, but the dive site is fantastic. After you're in, there's so much life. There's so much stuff to see. You can free dive there. You can scuba dive there. It's just great, despite the crazy entry.
Is the entry really that bad? I mean, it's really about schlepping your gear down, right?
It's true. If you take your gear down ahead of time, make some trips or whatever, and it's much better.
It's certainly a great place for freediving because of the depth. That's where we do our freediving courses, especially the advanced course. The only thing, it gets a little tricky when the tide's changing because you get a lot of current because it's in that big bay and it is pretty tidal. So that's a thing to look out for. But awesome place if you want to train for depth.
The not to confuse people, but the OG Nick 1, who was my kind of OG dive buddy. We used to go diving together 2 or 3 times a week there for a while, and he'd only want to dive Birchie. And I was so tired of scaling down that cliff every time. I made the agreement with him, I'll dive at Birchie, but you're carrying my tanks down. So I would just throw on my dry suit and walk on down, and he'd have to drag all my tanks and fins and everything down for me. But
And that's really a huge thing with Birchie is you definitely need to be, going with somebody else that knows the spot well. I mean, it's a fantastic site once you get down into it, but the journey you have to take
it's
getting over it with all the gear.
Getting back to that exact cove sometimes can be a little bit tricky because if you surface a little bit early and you look at the shoreline, it kind of all looks the same. So make sure you take your headings and remember where you're going.
Yeah, and if you look at a site map, there is a big underwater mound that is visible at low tide, but you can't see at high tide. So when you're swimming in, you feel like you're in one spot, but sometimes you can be on the other side of that mound, so you can kind of either come up a cove over or swim by it a little bit.
Yep.
So you have to keep an eye on that too. And we keep saying it's for advanced divers, but you know what? There's a dive shop that comes down from New Brunswick all summer long. They bring their open water divers there, and they complete their open water course at that dive site. There's some good shallower stuff there.
There is.
It's some task loading if you're going to go down there, so you want to make sure that you're like comfortable with everything. But there's some good shallow diving there as well.
Yeah, the shallow is good.
It's so Canadian. It just seems like the absolute opposite of a nice boat dive in the Caribbean where it's a nice drift dive. Then you get up and you have a margarita, and then you go have a cerveza later and everything's fine. Like, it just seems so Canadian in its Northern Atlantic diving. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, and I think about it, we got some other dive sites. I mean, I'm thinking of Chibukta Head, where you kind of have to hike down, or
Portuguese
Burns
Cove.
Point, just before Burns Point, just before Peggy's Cove. That's quite a trek down too with the gear. So Birchie, comparatively, I mean, it's rocky, but it's a pretty short trek down, and definitely worth it once you get in.
Nick Winkler, you have a book recommendation for us this week.
I want to recommend The Imperiled Ocean, Human Stories from a Changing Sea by Laura Trettieri. She's a Canadian ocean journalist, former writer and editor at ocean.org, based out of the Vancouver Aquarium. The book is a series of short stories around the question of what draws us to the ocean. So it's something that everybody should be able to relate to, and I think will have some interest for everyone that reads it. The subtitle, Human Stories from a Changing Sea, is really what the book focuses on, and it fits really well with the interview that we just heard from Simon. These stories take us from the journeys of migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea, to underwater Hollywood film sets, to people fighting to keep the ocean free from trash. So it really covers a whole range of stuff. It's not just about diving. It's not just about conservation. It's just about how people connect to the ocean and what relationship they have, and how they've experienced the ocean. You can shop for it here locally in Halifax or Charlottetown, PEI at bookmarkreads.ca, and it's also available online as an ebook, so it should be accessible to anyone, and you can support local while you're doing it.
April, you've got a safety tip for us this week.
Yeah, so my safety tip this week, I've been trying to think of some safety tips that are a little more outside of the traditional realm of safety tips. So this week, I'm just going to talk about kind of your overall wellness and how that's actually very, very beneficial when diving. So this would just be like diet, exercise, and even mental health. These are all things that are super, super important when you're diving. It's really important to stay in shape and, be healthy when you're diving. And I think anyone who's done a course, when you fill out that medical, it's fairly obvious in that sense. And I think we all know when you are in good shape, it's a lot easier to dive and it's a lot easier to get these things done. It also puts you in a much better position to rescue someone. So if you're overall really fit and healthy and your buddy ever needed help, you're going to have a lot better chance at, helping them than if you're not in the best shape. So just taking care of yourself and being overall healthy can really help you out. And same goes for kind of your mental state. So if you're having a really rough day and mentally, scuba diving is a big stress reliever for a lot of us, but there are days where, maybe it's just not a great day to go for a dive.
Fisher said last week it's always important to be able to call a dive for any reason, so don't feel pressured to go into the water when you're not there.
It's absolutely following the same sort of line of thought as April and Justin here, that knowing sort of where you're at mentally is also really important to be able to gauge when you're choosing where to dive. So, I mean, we talked about Birchie Head today as our dive site review, as a site that drops off pretty quick and you have this pretty physically demanding getting into the water. If you're not all there sort of mentally, or you're not having a great day, maybe don't choose to or agree to go diving on a really difficult site. I mean, go to old tried and true Paddy's Head if you just want to go for a quick dive that's not very, physically demanding, but you want to go see some lobsters and, just sort of take your mind off things. I think that's a great way to look at it as well.
I think the other really important thing is it's not just the ability for you to help someone out, but also not become a liability to other divers, your buddy or other people in the group, or putting rescuers at risk that may have to be called in. So that's also really important. Super
good point. And I know for me, like before I dove primarily with the sea foxes, the majority of my buddies were men, and I think all of them a fair bit bigger than me. So if I had to rescue one of them, it could definitely be a struggle when they have like 100 pounds on me. So the better I take care of myself, the more I can help them if we ever got in a bad situation. And like Nick's saying, vice versa, the more they take care of themselves, the easier it is for me to rescue them.
To follow that up, who should we follow on social media?
So this week, I decided to go a little bit more local. Past couple of weeks, I've kind of been saying different brands to follow. This week, I'm recommending our good friend Chris Power. He's actually in Newfoundland now, but he used to be in Nova Scotia. His Instagram is CJ Power Photos. He is really, really cool. And if you go through his feed, he has some really awesome photos. Torpedo Rays does the Blackbeards cruise every year. And he went on that, I think it was last year, 2 years ago. Anyhow, he took some incredible photos on that. So if you're looking for someone a bit more local to follow, I would definitely just say Chris Power is an awesome one.
Awesome. Yeah, he does some great stuff. And I think a future episode cover art will feature one of his photos for when we interview Mitt Parasram. So that'll be good times.
Sweet.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's another excellent follow tip, April. My Instagram is getting better and better every week.
Glad to hear it.
Well, that does it for today's episode. I'd like to thank my co-hosts, April Weichert.
Thanks for having me. Another one done.
Another one in the books. Nick Fisher.
Thanks for having me again this week, Justin.
Always a pleasure. Mr. Winkler.
Nice to be here, and thanks everyone for listening.
Justin, you know what we forgot to talk about?
What did we forget to talk about?
Your new friends at home.
My new friends at home? Nobody wants to hear about two frogs.
This is not a baby announcement. No.
April's talking about my two dwarf African clawed frogs. Yeah, little frogs that live in your aquarium. They got named. Someone suggested Nick 2 and Nick 3 after our co-hosts here. But now we've just moved their names to Fish and Winks after their last names here. And so I now have two frogs, one named Fish and one named Winks.
That will confuse your children so badly. The frog is named Fish. I don't know. I feel bad for the biology teacher in the future.
Yeah, well, it's good. It's good times. There was a funny video of my son pointing out which one was which, and he was like, "That's Mr. Winks" or something. It was pretty funny.
I'm just offended he didn't get 3 frogs. I don't know why that happened, but I'll talk to my therapist about it later, I guess.
We ordered 3 frogs and they only had 2, April. I swear to God. It's the truth.
Did you really?
Yeah. We couldn't go into the store to pick them up. We had to have them bring them out. Couldn't see them, so ordered 3. They only had 2. So maybe if they get restocked on the frogs, we'll get an April frog.
Were you gonna name it April?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How hard would it be to just find a frog to put in the tank?
Well, the aquarium frogs live underwater, like aquatic frogs, whereas like your bullfrog or whatever you find outside lives out of the water and goes into the water from time to time.
Get a bullfrog and name that one April. Oh yeah, that's what I want.
Got
Hell
it.
Yeah.
We'll do April.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. You can follow. Back to the closing of the show.
Sorry.
You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at divein.thepodcast. You can email us divein.thepodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me at idiveok. April's at April Weichert. Nick Winkler is at Nicholas Winkler Photography. Nick Fisher is at scuba_406. You can find links for everything we mentioned today in the show notes or on our website, diveinthepodcast.podbean.com. We'll see you next Monday when we speak to Will Ristine. It'll be a little different. He'll actually join us for the entire episode. We're changing things up, and we'll talk to him about what it's like going from zero to hero, becoming a scuba instructor. This episode of Dive in the Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Torpedo Rays Scuba. Head over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thanks for listening. We're changing things up, and we'll talk to him about what it's like going from zero to hero, becoming a scuba instructor. This episode of Dive in the Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Torpedo Rays Scuba. Head over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thanks for listening.